Thanks everyone for being here on a Sunday morning. I appreciate it. I know I wasn't particularly chuffed about having to get up so early this morning, but now that I'm here, everything is great. So we are indeed a charity, and I think that probably quite a few of you have either heard of us or kind of done some stuff with us in the past. Actually, could I have a quick show of hands? Who even knows what DataKind is, or who? Yay. Okay, so you guys can just leave the room. For the other ones, here's the presentation that we're gonna basically go through two projects that we've run over one last year and one the year before, and then we're going to kind of give you some insight into what we do that is a bit different from the other kind of data science projects that you might be used to in the for-profit sector, and what we're really trying to achieve in the charity sector and how we do that. So this is who we are, or at least a small amount thereof. So we're a non-profit, and the basic reason for us existing is that we believe that the same techniques that are used in the for-profit sector, the same algorithms that are used to optimize click or to sell more stuff that is not needed to people, or to, ensure that the right number of people get to the right place at the right time, all those algorithms and techniques can actually be used in the non-profit sector as well. And actually, they might be even more useful there because of the nature of the kind of social complexity that those sectors are often tackling. The challenge, obviously, is often a financial one for charities because, as the name indicates, charities are often mostly just running on very tight funding. They've got very few volunteers, and it's very rare for them to have a data scientist in-house. Now, one of these social organizations that we're going to be giving you an example of actually does happen to have a data scientist in-house, but that's an extremely, pretty much that's like a one-off thing. That's never occurred before otherwise. So the charities that we work with, they don't have data scientists in-house. They don't really know what data science is. And some of them, most of them know what data is, but obviously that kind of level of awareness is extremely kind of on a broad spectrum. And so it's, those are people whose main kind of work is really social work. So their kind of, their challenges are that often they don't have really a clue what data science can do for them. So they're sitting on extremely interesting data, but they don't really know how to use it to solve the problems that they're trying to solve. And this is where we come in. So we're trying to basically get together a lot of people who are pretty much all data scientists, although we kind of take people who've got more kind of project managerial type roles usually. And those people come from all over the world. So we're definitely a global network. We've got 6 chapters. We've got a chapter in Bangalore. We've got one in Singapore. We've got one here in the UK. And then we've got 3. Actually, that's one more than that. So we've got Dublin as well, and DC, San Francisco. And then we've got HQ in New York, which is the kind of the mothership. And we've got we've got hundreds of volunteers, all of whom, are kind of somewhat on a more ad hoc basis than others. Some of them kind of, work with us all the time. I work with DataKind. I've been working with them for about 2 years now on a kind of almost kind of weekly basis at the moment. And then we've got people who come in once in a while. And all those people are people who basically are hopefully, trying to find a way to use their data skills for social good, which is something that maybe in your day job you don't necessarily get to do. So if you work in finance and you want to get yourself some karma points, you can come and work with us. And if you don't, then you can also, it's also a great kind of way to get people involved in, feeling that what you're doing is actually making a difference. I think there's a lot of growing concern about the ethics of data science, both related to the data that we use, the way that we apply it, the kind of algorithm bias that is kind of becoming a more kind of visible problem. So, if you kind of want to feel like the data science and the skills that you've got are actually contributing to solving real problems, then, definitely come in and work with us. So the data science that we do is somewhat of a different data science that you guys might be used to. And I'm going to assume that all of you here know what data science is. So I'm not going to give you the kind of Venn diagram of data science-y thing that you've all seen thousands of times. But essentially, the kind of data that we've got is often not really what you would think of as big data. Actually, it's often not even really what you would think of as medium data. I'm not sure where that level is now, to be honest. And I don't think it's really relevant. Actually, what we've got is data that's often quite small scale, quite patchy, and more importantly, is data through which you can directly see the human problems that the charities are trying to solve. So I'm going to give you, after this, an example of work that we did with Centerpoint, which is a homelessness charity. And when you look at this data, you can see the problems directly. You can see the numbers of homeless people. You can see what happened to them. You can see why they're homeless, what happened to their journey. And this is data that is very I mean, to me, that's kind of one of the strengths of this data, is that you get involved with it, and right away you know that you're dealing with real human problems. And you can see that it is, very much kind of data that's close to the people. But obviously, that also means that you have extreme kind of anonymization issues, so you need to be extremely careful how you handle it. So it's data, it needs to be handled with care, so often small size, very human data. And the science that we do is really the science that you would think would be the science that any charity would usually normally do, which is actually try and test the hypothesis and try and test the theory of change. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve in society? Is it, growing, food poverty? Is it homelessness? Is it, domestic violence? And is the action, or are the actions that I'm taking having the right effect? So this kind of approach, the kind of classic, I guess basically the scientific method, is not something that most charities approach their work with, often because they don't really have the capacity or the kind of data to assess this. So often this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to help charities understand whether the impact that they're having is really the right impact, whether it's sufficient, and whether they're using their resources in the right way. So it's really science and hypothesis testing that has for goal actual action plans that the charity can put into place. And hopefully, be able to demonstrate that, yes, what they're doing has a good impact and has the right effect, and therefore that they can, that's something that we will use to get some funding as well. So something to keep them going and to kind of to hold up as proof of their efficiency. So the events that we run, I'm just going to go through extremely quickly here to give you an idea of how we do all this. So we've got some community events that we are going to do more and more of. I mean, some of those community events are basically, Charlie and I being here and talking to you guys, and so engaging with the data science community, but also a lot of events engaging with the nonprofit community. So it's always a two-pronged approach. We are actually holding some kind of data science kind of office hours for charities where they can just call in and say, well, I've got those kind of issues, I've got this kind of data, what can I do with it? We do a lot of, kind of ad hoc data advice. So we're really trying to grow a large community that involves two groups that very often don't really, get to meet each other. Then the data dives, which are probably the events that you're most familiar with. And so those data dives are running, there's two sides of the data dive. There's the dive itself, which takes place over a weekend. And that is essentially a hackathon, but I mean, the big difference with a hackathon is that actually what we're trying to get out of it is a proper, reproducible, usable, and verifiable analysis, or I mean, hopefully data science type of analysis that comes from the data that the charity gave us, or from data that we gathered to try and solve the problem that the charity is tackling. And so those data dives, sometimes we're going to have something like, 2 or 3 different charities that actually have a project on the day, and then we have maybe 80 to 100 volunteers showing up, and then everybody gets moved around in different groups, and then you get to work on one aspect of a project for a whole weekend. And then those data dives are headed by people that we call the data ambassadors. So both Charlie and I have been data ambassadors on projects. And so those people are on the day essentially kind of conducting the project and helping people work on the project over the weekend. But then they also work with the charity for often, I think it's, up to about 2 months before the dive. So that means meeting up with the charity very regularly, looking at the data, crunching it, checking that the data is clean, which it never is, so that there's a lot of data munching involved, a lot of data cleaning, a lot of kind of reassessment and readjustment of expectations, because very often, like I said, the people that we work with they're not data science savvy necessarily, so they might have completely, over-the-top expectations of what can be done. You might have a charity that comes to us and say, well, we just want to solve world hunger. Can we do that in 2 days? It was like, no problem. So you kind of have to do a lot of readjustment here, and so that's kind of a fairly heavy work involved over the period of about 2 months, and then you get to the dive, and hopefully the data's clean, the data's ready to go, and you've decided what it is that you were going to do with it. So it's very much kind of like a consultancy type role, but you have to work extremely closely with the charity, and we'll talk a bit about that later as well. And then the data core projects are not completely dissimilar, but the only people who work on the data core projects are the data ambassadors. So we're going to have often a team of 2 to 3 people working together, somebody who's going to be more like a kind of data, 2 data scientists, and then the project manager often. And then those people are going to be working on a weekly basis with the charity to try and deliver something that's kind of fairly, kind of kind of I mean, I hate the word deliverable, but essentially what is what it is. And so something that actually can be the result of a project. So it can be, a design. It can be an analysis or a model that can be rerun. It can be something that's actually implemented. So some actual kind of algorithm that is implemented in a specific fashion that can be rerun and redone easily by the charity. And those take place over 4 to 6 months. So those are fairly in-depth projects, and so they involve a little bit more actual data science on the part of the data ambassadors than the data dev does. So those are essentially the kind of 3 ways that we try and solve those problems. So what we're going to be doing now is going through 2 different projects that we've run, and Charlie's going to be showing you the first one, and we'll kind of explain to you exactly how those projects kind of fit into the grand design of what we do. And then we'll give you some key insights into the magic world of data science for good. So I'll leave the slides to Charlie.
Thanks, Emma.
That's that thingy there.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a data dive that happened with WeFarm as the partner organization last September. I was the data ambassador for that. So like Emma said, data dives they run like hackathons. The tagline is, the goal is insights, not apps. Right? It's catchy. They're really intensive, very sociable. They're fueled on coffee and takeaways. And they're basically a lot of fun. It's really impressive what people can achieve. Like, you get a big group of people in a room for a weekend. They bring loads of enthusiasm, different expertise, different interests, different tools that they're really familiar with. And they're great. I can't recommend it enough. You can sign up to one. If you come along, it's a lot of fun. So because they're so intense, they're short, it's really important that the data ambassadors strategize carefully, scope the problem, and decide how to milk everything they can out of the volunteers that do show up on the weekend. So WeFarm. WeFarm are a text message-based forum for farmers in rural countries. They mainly operate in Kenya, also Uganda, Peru, and a couple of other places. Rural farmers are a really vulnerable group. They have limited access to information. They're often operating at subsistence level with, so if like a damaged crop or a disease in their livestock can be literally life or death. They don't have access to information or finance, but they often have very resourceful solutions to the kinds of problems that they face. And so WeFarm is all about trying to build a network so that people can share that knowledge that they've built up. If they don't have access to the internet, they can use this text-based forum to communicate with each other and share these solutions. So this is roughly how it worked. A farmer hears an advert. They text the platform saying, I want to sign up. And they use a code corresponding to the advert that they heard, so either on the radio or in a newspaper. And that tells the system what language they prefer. The system then exchanges a series of messages with them, asking them questions like, what's your name, your age, your gender, are you a member of a co-op, and all these other things. And they don't necessarily reply. So you have quite sparse data about specific users. But they're signed up once they've sent the initial text. Then, if a farmer has a question, he texts that question to the platform, and it gets automatically distributed to a random selection of other users, ideally from the same co-op, but not necessarily. That's not always possible. So anywhere between 10 and 100 people receive this question and it's sent out. And if they have an answer, they reply to the system using a prefix code, and that answer is automatically routed back to the person that asked the question. So that works quite well in some cases, but it does lead to some user frustration. We've got some stories here that came out from the dive. So top left, for example, this guy wants to quit. He's desperate to quit. First he's polite, he gets more formal, and then he just gets quite desperate. Please, 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 I want to quit. This one's interesting, buy my pigs. So the guy wants to sell a pig. He wants to know what he can expect for it. He keeps asking, he feels ignored. Somebody responds with the name of Jane, but he has no way of contacting the person that says, who is Jane? Jane is interested in my pig, because you can't route a question back to the answerer. So he gets in this loop, basically. He gets really increasingly frustrated that he can't sell his pig. He wants Jane's mobile number. And eventually he says, how do you expect us to be a WeFarm member? So he gets really annoyed. Over here, style up Jane. How do I contact Tabitha? So that's kind of an interesting one. Somebody's responded to a message that's been signed off with the name Tabitha. Nobody knows who Tabitha is because the how do I contact Tabitha message goes to a new random sample of users. So some people suggest Facebook, and then you get these sassy answers like, style up, Jane. What sort of question are you asking? Shame on you. That's kind of also interesting, right? Because a fairly common attempted use is a dating service. People want like a Lonely Hearts thing. This guy, 23, needs a lady to marry, 19 to 26. Who can I marry? I've got so many cows. Hook me up, man. So, yeah. So the fact that the platform is limited to a single exchange of a question and answer, the answer goes back to the original questioner, that's kind of an intrinsic feature, and people get frustrated with that. So we want to improve that, and that was identified as our main goal for the data dive. So short of creating this two-way system, that would require a complete re-engineering of the whole platform. So that was beyond the scope, right? But we decided that we could improve the user experience by improving question routing. So trying to make sure that the questions are good quality and that they go to users who are likely to have an answer for that question. That requires understanding of the users, so where they are, what they know about, what they're interested in, what their expertise is in. Also what languages they speak, of course. That can be often more than one. And also an understanding of the question. So what is the question actually about? And how good is it? Is it worth sending it out if it's just something like, who's Tabitha? Or, where's my pig? Etc. So we have this two-pronged approach, understanding of the users, understanding of the questions, and they will hopefully feed into each other to improve question routing. This is the data set that we prepared. So we were lucky enough to have an in-house data scientist at WeFarm. He helped us with this, but we wanted to scope it quite carefully, so we limited it to messages, users. Those tables are fairly self-explanatory. We had about 64,000 users once we'd filtered out only those in Kenya with a preferred language of English and Swahili. And then the messages that those users sent, that was about 240,000. And the responses table is a bit more complicated, but that's basically all messages that were sent to or from the system and who. So if a question was sent out to someone and no answer was received, that's still logged in the responses table. And so on the users, there was some really good work on analyzing usage patterns and trying to detect frustration. I'm not going to explain that right now because it's a bit too complicated. But basically, we have this user segmentation where down here we've got, so on the x-axis, questions answered. On the y, questions asked. So people who don't do either are lurkers. People who ask a lot but don't give any answers, those are learners. Gurus are the ones who are founts of knowledge. And then super users just absolutely love WeFarm, can't get enough. So that's quite useful. And then looking at the messages, again, there was some really good work trying to assess the quality of questions. That turned out to be really quite difficult. We looked at message length, how consistent the spelling was, how well it translated to the target language, what time of day it was sent. None of those things really correlated with how many answers it received. So we kind of gave up on that. But topic analysis was quite successful. We're just going to do a quick demo or a display of a PyLDA viz visualization. So is this one? Thanks. So I thought this was quite brave up until Gene's keynote yesterday, which was just one big demo. That was amazing. I'm just going to mouse over some of these topics. So if we look at, there. So topic number 1, plant, seed, maize, potato. Where's number 3? That's about chickens and eggs and hens. There you go. Now you know which one comes first. Haha. That one's about cows. So that looks like it's giving some meaningful results. So that's great. That's enough, I think. Yeah. How do we get back to the...
Do you want to go back to the slide?
Yeah. Cool, thanks. And then we have a little homemade emoji cloud which shows the main topics we identified. Chickens are really important, crops are big, livestock's big, corn. That little poo is fertilizer. Yeah, tomatoes. So it's kind of meaningful, right? We can see that people are asking questions about farming, and they split reasonably nicely into topics. So that's great. And so those two threads are then tied together, and we have this kind of prototype that was just about put together in the space of the weekend, where the system has a way of detecting a question comes in, it's about chickens, and the system can now pick this guy up here. He is an expert on chickens. He lives in the next region, but it's worth sending him this question because he answers everything about chickens. These people down here, they're in the same region. He also likes chickens. She's more into cows, but she answers a lot of questions. And this guy, well, he's nearby. It's worth throwing in the question and seeing if he has anything. So yeah, that was what we came up with. Thanks. Bless you.
Cool. So yeah, so that was an example of a project that we did that again had kind of actually a fairly kind of complicated set of questions. And then when we started it, we weren't really sure exactly what we were going to be looking at. But this was split into a lot of different threads, and a lot of different groups were working on different things that we then pulled together. The next project I'm going to show you is quite a different one actually. So this was Centrepoint. So Centrepoint is, I think probably most of you have heard of them. I mean, they're quite well known in London. So they're the UK's leading charity for homeless young people. They support over 8,500 young homeless people, young being defined as 16 to 25-year-olds, all over the UK. Their London centre is fairly big. They're also working in Yorkshire and in the northeast of England. So they're really an organization that tries to tackle the issue of youth homelessness specifically. And it is, as you'll see, a difficult issue to tackle, mostly because it's kind of fairly unclear exactly what the scale is. And it's a hard issue to actually define. I mean, homelessness generally is hard to define because, as you can imagine, a lot of it is somewhat hidden. So it's really hard to get proper stats on it. And then if you don't have proper stats, it's even harder to do any work, any significant work, and to even prove that your work is having an impact. So the Centrepoint team actually had a data analyst in-house and somebody who was definitely very skilled in, if not data science, at least kind of data analysis generally and data awareness. And I think actually the whole of Centrepoint is a very, Centrepoint is a very data-aware charity. So that was, again, another project where we kind of at least had part of our work kind of done for us because we were working with people who understood the value of data. And just, I mean, that doesn't mean necessarily that the data was of great quality, but they understood what it was that would be needed. And they also had, because of their work with different kind of geographical locations, extremely kind of detailed knowledge of stuff like what is a lower super output area versus a super output area. They kind of understood all that stuff. So anyone who's kind of ever worked with GeoJSON of the UK kind of the UK geography will realize that this is kind of a fairly niche thing to know about in non-data circles. So it was really good to be working with people who understood exactly some nerdy stuff like this. So the main question that we had is how many young people are facing homelessness in the UK? And this is really a fairly simple question. Actually, it kind of became the one thing that we worked on during the whole data dive. And the way that we went about assessing this question was to send out, or at least Centrepoint had been sending out freedom of information requests to every single local authority in England, and gotten about 50% of them back. So that means that for about 50% of the local authorities, we had data on the scale of homelessness in that local authority, and that kind of data was dependent. I mean, in some local authorities, it was extremely well prepared and extremely clear what it was that they were referring to. In some ones, they just sent us a bunch of, like Word documents with a few kind of numbers here and there that we couldn't really make any sense out of. So already, even out of the 50% of data that we had, the data quality was extremely varied. And this kind of question, how many young people are facing homelessness in UK, is something that you would think there would be a clear answer for, and I guess maybe you're wondering, well, why didn't you even know? But actually, nobody does know, because that is, I mean, like I said, homelessness is in great part a kind of hidden problem in society, and the official figures do exist, but we had, and I mean, Centrepoint had already kind of previously done some assessment on this, at least on a kind of small scale basis, and they knew that the official figures were nowhere near the actual scale of the problem. And to give you an idea of just how difficult it is to actually get a proper vision of what is going on with the problem of homelessness in the UK. So this is a pretty complicated but actually really well done graphic that Centrepoint came up with. And all those question marks, there's the click a pointy thing. Does it work? Yes, no, never mind. So all the question marks are areas where basically, so you have a young person to start the trajectory, and they can be rerouted through, a dozen different routes, and then at about, all the points during the trajectory, essentially, they can just kind of be lost. So they'll be lost. I mean, the kind of most obvious one is the one in the beginning where somebody's homeless, but they might not ask for help, or nobody might actually register that they're homeless. So those people are lost already because they never were on the grid. And then you get lost because you actually get rehoused, but then you're kind of like relapsed, and actually nobody's tracked this. If you go all the way out to the kind of assessed under the Children's Act, which is something that is going to happen to you if you're of a kind of like younger age, then you will actually potentially not be helped, or you'll be found to be in need of help but sent home with support, and then we don't know whether that actually worked or not. So there's also a lot of actions that are kind of semi-actions when you go, okay, well, you just go and do this, and then people will just forget about you, and you're off the grid again. And then there are all those other question marks here where basically the only way to get properly housed if you're an adult is to be eligible and to be qualified as unintentionally homeless and in priority need, and then you'll get rehoused. Anything else will not be rehoused. And so those people, all of those people there, so eligible, in priority need, and homeless, but intentionally so, which is a very kind of perverse way of describing homelessness, because who's intentionally homeless? But that essentially means people who kind of through extremely hard circumstances had to leave their home, they just couldn't live there. And so for whatever kind of social reasons, and that means that that was your choice, so therefore we're not rehousing you. Eligible, homeless, but not in priority need, so you're homeless, but it's not priority need, so I mean, that could mean a lot of things, and again, like the way that people on the local authority kind of, that in local authorities will assess that priority need level, or that kind of intentionally, unintentionally homeless kind of classification. Those are very kind of human decisions to make. So it's not even like this is a kind of clean classification. There's no way to really tell whether that was done properly. And then there's all those ineligible people, and so that can cover a lot of people. So there's all those question marks here and there. And the figures that we do have that are the official figures, they're only covering the things that were tracked. So you can imagine that really that there's no way that this figure there actually kind of corresponds to the reality of the problem. So what we did is that we got, like I said, about 50% of the data that we wanted. And even within that 50%, there were some holes, and there was some unclarity, and there was a lot of stuff that just didn't make any sense. So we had to go back to the local authorities and say, hang on a minute, that number just doesn't seem right. What's going on with this? But overall, the main problem actually was to just impute the missing local authority numbers from the ones that we did have, which essentially turned into a massive project of good old multivariate regression, which we ran on every factor that we could think of. And this is when we started plugging any other kind of demographic data set that we could find. So we went to the ONS, we went to World Bank, we went to whatever other kind of data sets that we could get that were describing the kind of basic demographic characteristics of the local authorities that we were missing, as well as the ones that we weren't, and try and see if we could do some imputation there. So those are kind of fairly, actually those are probably not the best and not the most predictive characteristic that we got, but this gives you, I mean, we had, I don't know, like dozens and dozens of those. And so what we found was that there were a few things that tended to correlate fairly well with a high number of homeless people. So actually the second highest correlation that we had with whether a local authority had a high number of young homeless people was how many vacant dwellings there were, which is amazingly perverse if you think about it, because that basically means that the more empty houses there are in a council, the more likely they are to have a lot of people who don't have somewhere to sleep, which is just beautiful. And then the most highly correlated factor that we had with homelessness was the number of homes sold through the right to buy scheme. So again, kind of a fairly interesting insight into the way that the kind of general kind of social politics actually work in the UK, where actually there is a housing stock and council will get rid of them somehow through the right to buy scheme. So you will buy your housing you'll buy your council flat essentially, and that is no longer a council flat that's available as somewhere that people can be relocated. So a council that's got a high number of homes sold through the right to buy scheme is also likely to have a high number of homeless people. So we found a lot of very interesting, somewhat controversial stuff in that data. So that was kind of a really, just for that only, that was a really interesting project because it was really, it was kind of quite hard to kind of look at this and not think, well, hang on, what is going on here? There was a lot of weird stuff. So this is what we had in the beginning. So we kind of concentrated on the England area only, actually, because as you can see, and I kind of cropped it off, actually Scotland was just perfect. They had everything mapped out. They had all the data. They returned everything. They were great. If there's any Scottish people there, thank you. It was just, honestly, I was kind of blown away at just like how different the policy of A, answering from information requests was in Scotland, and B, how well their data was, how much of a kind of strong will there was to actually kind of map out and track those things extremely rigorously. So that was great. So we really concentrated on trying to get the data for the missing regions in England, which you can see are many. And so what we ended up with was this, which means we filled the holes, hooray. And so all those councils that were, those local authorities that were missing, we imputed it. So from all the variables that we had on this local authority. And we basically got to an estimate number that was this. So the official figure was 13,000. So it was estimated by the government that there were 13,000 young people who were homeless, in the UK. And our provisional findings were 90,000. So that was actually the over 8 times as many young people ask for help because they are homeless than the number accepted as statutory homeless. So those were our findings at the end of the data dive. And then what we did after the data dive is that we kind of carried on with the work because it had been kind of fairly difficult because we had a lot of data crunching and munging to do during the dive, so we didn't have time to actually finish the analysis as well as we wanted. So we did a kind of fairly simple regression that came up with the 90,000 number. And then post-data dive, a few of our data scientists, volunteer data scientists, carried on working with the model and refined it a little bit and kind of took a slightly less kind of naive approach to actual kind of coefficients and, basically tried to understand whether actually the councils that had not responded had kind of somewhat different characteristics because of the fact that they had not responded to the ones that did respond. And so they went a bit further into the kind of statistical analysis of all the demographic data there and came up with that number, which is significantly higher, which is 136,000. So this is the number where at the moment, or at least that was as of last year, we stood, and Centrepoint has been using this number a lot, both to kind of demonstrate the need of an extremely kind of strong response to youth homelessness, which is rising, and also to kind of demonstrate how useful it is to kind of use this data to really look at, because all of this data is free data. I mean, it's the data that you can, freedom of information request, any of you can file one. All the data we used was public data. So this is really a project that actually, in theory, could have just been done by absolutely anyone. So this is also a project that really helped us demonstrate the use of open data and the use of, just kind of using all of the data sets to try and solve a real problem and answer a real question. If you think about it, actually, if the government had wanted from the beginning to get a good idea of how many people were homeless, they could have actually done all that work and gotten to that point, right? So this is where the NGO sector kind of jumps in and goes, okay, well, this is what we do, and we're going to try and and kind of fill in the blanks and try and do all the work that should be done by the authorities but are not actually being followed up with. And so this kind of result led to quite a lot of publications. It led to a lot of press for Centrepoint and for the kind of general coverage of the issue in the UK. So this was overall a kind of really successful data dive. And it was an interesting one because we did in the end that number really was the single result that we got out of it. It wasn't a single result actually, because the map was also a result, and obviously that was a database that we then built up, and so they had more data to work with. But it was a very simple problem, and quite unlike the WeFound one, where you kind of had to do a lot of rerouting and thinking about who was answering what and what they were saying and what it meant and where they were and when they were answering and all that kind of complicated kind of network stuff. Actually, this was fairly straightforward. But it's also very useful, and so that's kind of another side of the data analysis that we do. So this was the second project I wanted to show you, and we're now going to be showing you sharing with you some insights from from Data Science for Good.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Yeah, so I'm just going to give an overview of some of the 3 lessons learned from working with charities and how it's slightly different from working in the commercial sector. So, the first one, finding problems can be harder than finding solutions. So, this is a bit frustrating, actually. A good cause doesn't necessarily amount to a good project. And the big organizations with a lot of funding, who you might expect to have the expertise, are not always the ones with whom you can construct a well-scoped project. The size of the data doesn't matter, big data, small data. We just need relevant data, and that's not always available. When a charity approaches us and we can't find a project with them, we have a data maturity framework that we try and point them towards, and that was developed with Nesta, the Innovation Foundation. That is designed to help them kind of think about where they're lacking and how they could improve their expertise and their awareness of their data usage. Lots of charities want help with marketing, and that's boring. So we have like a blanket no policy on any kind of like targeting of fundraising. And yeah, scoping the problem can be really difficult. As Emma said, like we want to predict the future or find invisible things. Like those are quite difficult. Finding the interface between like what the charity wants and what's actually possible with the available data can be difficult. And you have one group of people that understand what is possible with the technology, and another group that understand the sector and the needs, and so you have to find the interface there. And tied into that is that communication is much, much more important than technology. So we're not really interested in like developing a fancy solution, right? We want to make a difference. That's the idea. If you've done consulting, you know well that it's important to speak to your audience. And we have a strict no jargon policy. And the rule of thumb is don't say p-value to anyone unless they've said it to you already. And yeah, you have one group of people that don't know what API stands for and another group that don't know what SDG stands for. Does anyone know what SDG stands for? Sustainable Development Goals. So obviously it's quite important in the sector. And yeah, often a project can tank just because 2 sides aren't speaking the same language. Anyone who's done any interdisciplinary work at all will know that, I think. And finally, yeah, it's important to work with, not for. So again, we're not interested in creating a fancy data science solution. You do get to do that sometimes, and that's fun. But the main motivation is making an impact, changing a behavior, persuading someone to provide funding or something like that. And if the other side, if the social partner is not involved in the process from the start, then you'll likely end up building a vanity project, something that's flashy and you're happy with, but that will not get used. You might dump a load of code in a GitHub repo, but they don't have anyone who knows how to code, and they won't understand it. So, and yeah, even worse than that, if you're not careful, you can actually end up doing harm. If you're not very rigorous with your analysis, and if you make assumptions that don't actually apply to the social sector, you can end up giving very poor, misleading advice, and the sensitive nature of the data that you're handling means that can be very damaging. So there's not a great answer to that, but we think that involving the stakeholders right from the beginning and as heavily as possible, and making sure that there is a stakeholder partner, somebody in the organization who's dedicated to it from the start is really important. Yeah, that's about it, I think. Get involved. Come along. We have data dives coming up. There's one in Newport, which is a little bit of a trek, but that's a really important one, homelessness and domestic violence charities. And there's another data dive here at Bloomberg in July, which would be really great. Keep an eye out on the meetup page if you're interested. We'd love to have you along. So DataKind in the UK has 2 employees. Everyone else is a volunteer. And they're great employees, to be fair.
They're good.
But
They're good.
The community
good,
is also amazing.
Yeah.
And
but
yeah.
So are the volunteers.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So yeah, come and be a part of it, please. We'd love to have you.
And this is us. So get in touch, get involved. This is our Twitter thingy, and this is the meetup. So like I said, we do have quite a lot of meetups. We have meetups where we talk about other projects that we've done. We have meetups where we give you kind of results of projects that we've just done so that you can kind of know what we're up to regularly. And then we've got kind of slightly more, kind of general meetups talking about stuff like, ethics in data analysis on data science and all that kind of stuff. And this is our URL. So yes, we've left kind of quite a bit of time for questions, hoping that some of you have anything to ask us, although if you don't, then, that's fine too. But yeah, so we're really kind of hoping to get a lot of people involved. And again, it's like there are a lot of ways that you can get involved with us. It doesn't have to be through doing like, being necessarily a data ambassador for a data dive or whatever. There's loads of other things that we've got. And we've got a growing number of volunteers. So, but join the crowd. And yeah, do you have any questions about either what we've said or what we haven't said?
Yeah.
Do you, Mike? Yeah.
So I have a clap first. Good microphone. People have their questions. We've got time for a few questions.
I think we need to.
Time for lunch. So, questions. Morning. I'm just wondering why, with a lot of people in the commercial sector use data science for marketing applications, why the blanket no for your projects?
I think it's mainly a question of volunteer motivation because it really doesn't feel very different marketing to fundraise for a charity compared with fundraising or selling stuff for another organisation. It's a fairly out of the box thing, and that's one of the easier things for charities to get other commercial organisations to do for them. So we prefer to try and focus on more interesting problems, basically. That's a reasonable question.
But I think it's also because that what we want to get out of it is, obviously our primary kind of clients are the charity, but we do want volunteers to get involved in something that they think is contributing to social good, and I think that's kind of important. And if you're just doing something that's saying, oh, now this kind of marketing campaign is going to be more effective, it just doesn't kind of feel as if you've really solved the real problem there, or as if you even kind of really tackled it. So I think we're really trying to kind of stay on the side of what has an impact in the world as opposed to just for the charity. That's quite important.
Another question?
So this question is kind of twofold. So one, you had that kind of 136,000 figure.
Yeah.
What was the kind of confidence interval or prediction interval around that?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was something that we were kind of quite confident with because we did rerun it. Actually the 90,000 one was slightly less confident, and then we kind of refined it. I can look that up for you, but yeah, I don't remember.
And so the only other question kind of related to that is, that kind of analysis is something that, to get right, you've got to have quite a lot of statistical rigor, and you've got to really know what you're doing, which I'm sure you guys do. Yeah. How do you vet your volunteers, or how do you make sure that the people that you assign to projects are kind of qualified and not kind of overconfident? Because you can get the kind of Dunning-Kruger effect where somebody's done a couple of courses in AI on Coursera, and they go and do a project and they say something, but it might be completely wrong. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen?
So we don't vet the volunteers, but we do. There is kind of a sorting that does occur kind of fairly naturally when you have a group of, let's say, 50 people working on a project, and you wouldn't just manage to bullshit your way through it. And also, there. In that specific project, there was something like maybe 10 really committed people who actually carried on afterwards, and those were all people who were either kind of very, very good coders and all very good statisticians. And we actually had, we also knew who was on there, right? I guess we never kind of got to the point where we had somebody who thought, they don't really have the skills, they don't really know what they're doing, because actually, like, two of the leading kind of people who were working on the statistical sides had kind of very strong credentials, and they were working, with that kind of stuff as part of their day job, and you just kind of trust this. To be fair, it's never happened to us that we've had a situation where we thought that the person involved didn't really know enough. I think that we have a very vast kind of array of skills, and we have sometimes have people doing data dives who are not necessarily very skilled, but they're here to learn, and they kind of stand on the side and kind of get involved in things in a kind of more, as a learner in a learning position. And you do notice this, and we've never seen people kind of basically bullshit it. But I guess that's a risk. But in that case, it's never really happened. I don't know if it's happened in your projects, but it's.
No, I agree. I think it's
something we're aware of. But yeah.
Yeah, it's partially self-selecting, and partially there are lots of pairs of eyes on any interesting result. So there is enough expertise in the room between the ambassadors and the really skilled volunteers that come along to hopefully to provide sufficient checks and balances.
Yeah. But also, I mean, a thing that was important with that project was that the data analyst from the charity was there for the entire 2 days, and she was very, very involved. And so if there was anything that kind of seemed like it sounded right from a kind of statistical point of view, but it just didn't really make any sense at all from somebody who was actually involved on the terrain, that she was kind of providing a lot of checks and balances on that. And this is also kind of going back to the point that Charlie was making earlier, which is that as long as you keep people who actually who have the kind of proper expertise of the domain involved, you can't really get it completely wrong, because it's not like, we're very careful to not just kind of like dump a data science solution on something without understanding the domain. And obviously we have some understanding of it, but it's really, as long as you've got people like that kind of data analyst whose day-to-day job is to work with statistics related to homelessness involved, then that kind of provides a very good kind of, kind of a check and balance kind of point as well.
Lovely. And one more question before we move on. Anybody else? Question? Oh, sorry.
Thank you for the talk. Connected to the earlier question, actually, there seems to be a lot of risk in the sense that you quoted that figure, and then your center point that ended up using that figure for most of their presentations or for publicity.
Yeah.
So I realized how you guys just mentioned the ethics of algorithms and data science on the commercial side, but I guess that applies to not just the commercial side, but to you guys as well. And I guess that vetting side is really quite crucial.
Yeah.
And I guess there's some danger of being
we are
lost
aware
the process.
of it. Yeah, I mean, there's accountability involved, and we are accountable for this. I mean, this is a figure that we are accountable for, and we stand by it. And we've got, we try, and I mean, it's always very hard to get people when they're crunching away during 2 days to document everything they do. But we literally have people who just go around everyone and say, "Are you documenting? Are you documenting?" So we are making sure that that the code is open, anybody can check it, but also all the assumptions that are made are documented. So a lot of people during the project are not necessarily the data scientists. They're going to be other people behind who actually check that, and we go around with a notepad and say, okay, what assumption did you make when you did this and this and that, which is something that you kind of need in those instances. So yeah, but you're right. I mean, there is accountability, and we are aware of it, and especially from something like this. But we are, we've checked it quite a bit. Yeah.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you very much, Emma and Charlie. Big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.